Duke Nukem 3D. Possibly the poster child for over-the-top 2.5D shooters, is a game that's had its fair share of updates and re-releases over the years. And today we're going to talk about Duke Nukem 3D Megaton Edition, a now delisted collection containing Duke Nukem 3D Atomic Edition, Duke It Out in DC, Duke Caribbean Life's a Beach, and Duke Nuclear Winter. This collection was sadly delisted when the 20th anniversary version came out, and that is a shame because the Megaton edition was a much better value. But let's start by talking about the base game before we move on to the expansions. Duke 3D was different from other first-person shooters of the time. For one, it started in settings that seemed a little more relatable than most games. The first couple of levels start you in a city, which was different from the vast majority of first-person shooters back then. And yes, the game certainly does take you to more outlandish places, including outer space, but the fact you also saw just basic city streets that seemed somewhat realistic, at least back in 1996, really gave Duke 3D a different feel than most games. And it wasn't just the setting, it was also the way so many things in the environment could actually be interacted with in some way. Like certain walls that could be destroyed, or how you encounter a pool table that you can actually sort of play a very basic game of pool on, or how the environment shifts with scripted events. And of course you had Duke Nukem himself, who did a lot more talking than most first-person shooter protagonists. As before Duke Nukem, most of them were silent, and the few that did talk didn't really have that much to say. Both Duke and his game had a lot of personality, and the same can be said for the expansions we're going to talk about now. Starting with Duke It Out in DC, which starts you out in a level based on the White House. And that's kind of the whole gimmick of this expansion. You see various landmarks that you would associate with Washington, DC. And yes, there is a certain novelty to that, but nothing else is really all that different. None of the enemies have custom sprites, none of the weapons have been modified, and when you're not actually around a famous DC landmark, the levels become much more like something you would have played in the base game. And that's not to say that they're bad, it's just without a known DC landmark, you're kind of forgetting the whole gimmick of this expansion. And if you don't actually remember the political situation we were in the 90s, a lot of the jokes in this expansion are gonna go right over your head. Lots of references to Bill Clinton, Janet Reno, etc. The gameplay is of course still solid, but the novelty aspect hasn't exactly aged well. Now on the other hand, our next expansion is a little more ambitious. Duke Caribbean, Life's a Beach. Duke Nukem is on vacation in an island paradise, and apparently so are all his enemies, as they all have their sprites changed to reflect the island setting. And the same goes for all of Duke's weapons. They now look like squirt guns and bits of bamboo and whatnot. And if you go and use Duke Nukem's Mighty Boot, he's actually wearing a sandal. And if you can find a mirror, his reflection will actually show that. And you even get a new enemy or two. If nothing else, this expansion is very visually distinct. And unlike our last expansion, almost everything in this is meant to remind you of the island vacation setting. Now I am clear on one aspect of this expansion, however. Most of Duke's guns seem to be fairly harmless. Some of them have actually been turned into water guns. So I'm actually wondering what's really going on in this expansion. Are him and the aliens just playing an elaborate game with one another? And the weapons perform exactly as their regular counterparts would, so... And yes, I realize it's just a visual change, and nothing about the mechanics have actually been changed. And clearly, I'm thinking about how the weapons work in this far more than anyone needs to. Last, and most certainly least, we have Duke Nuclear Winter. And this expansion has a winter and Christmas theme, which you will be hit over the head with, as returning enemies all have Santa hats on, and new enemies are snowmen and Santa's elves. The first two levels are essentially the first levels of Duke 3D, but in reverse. Many of the secrets are still in the same places, but it turns out those two lazy first levels are preferable to what comes next, as the remaining levels in this expansion are all rather maze-like. And in these mazes, the enemies will respawn, but the ammo does not. So unless you know the exact path to get through the levels, you are in for a bad and very frustrating time. Maybe it's because I'm from part of the world where stores start putting out Christmas stuff for sale in August, but I find a Christmas-themed expansion more annoying than enjoyable in general. And maybe if Christmas didn't start till at least after Halloween, I might feel differently and be a little softer on this. But if you can actually stomach making it to the end, you do get to fight Santa Claus. And yes, that can be a little cathartic. And that is the Megaton collection, which sadly is delisted from Steam. I'm personally hoping it returns in some form, but that doesn't seem very likely, as the Duke in general seems to have fallen out of favor. Ever since Duke Nukem Forever, it kinda seems like the Duke Nukem well has been poisoned. However, if you're interested in playing any of the levels from these expansions, if you get the Duke Nukem 20th Anniversary on Steam, you can go to that game's workshop, and all of these levels are on there if you poke around a bit. You don't get to play them as a campaign, you have to load them individually, but still, at least you could play these levels if you're so inclined. And yes, I'd prefer a less clunky way to go about that too. Please do subscribe, comment, like, and tell your friends.